Week 14 of the fantasy football season, and here's the top 36 running backs I'm ranking with the playoffs next week and big games this week for many fantasy owners. Number 1, Saquon Barkley of the Philadelphia Eagles. What a season it's been for Saquon Barkley. MVP candidate, no doubt about it. And this week he's got a great matchup versus the Carolina Panthers. Wouldn't be surprising to me if he goes out there over 150 yards, finds the end zone. And no one stopped him all season long. And I believe this week versus Carolina, more of the same. Number 2, Alvin Kamara. The New Orleans Saints. Alvin Kamara, he's been the engine of this offense of the New Orleans Saints. And this Saints team, they definitely played better football over the last few weeks here. Last week was a tough loss late in that one, but Alvin Kamara, now even more touches he's going to get with Taysom Hill, who they were using a lot over the last few weeks as a gadget guy. He's out for the season with the knee injury. So this week in a great matchup at the New York Giants. Kamara, I think easily could break 100 yards from scrimmage in this ball game and go out there once again and have a big performance. Number 3, Bijan Robinson of the Atlanta Falcons. So when you have a good quarterback and a good offensive line and better coaching, this is what's going to happen. Bijan Robinson, last season, a lot of expectations in his rookie year, but this season he's gone out there and he's putting up huge numbers weekly for fantasy owners. So this week on the fast track in Minnesota, I know they're good defense, but they've had their troubles at times versus the run. And I think Bijan, he's been matchup proof, and he's proved it, especially over the last 6 weeks of the season. Number 4, Devon Achane of the Miami Dolphins. So what a season it's been for Devon Achane, especially getting full workload now over the last couple months of the season, where Raheem Mostert went down early in the year with injury. And Achane could do it all, catch the football out of the backfield, running between the tackles, and he just is an elusive running back and one of the better backs in the league. So this week in the matchup versus division rival, the New York Jets, that haven't stopped anyone all season long, I like Achane once again have a big game. Number 5, Chase Brown of the Cincinnati Bengals. Chase Brown, great matchup with the Cowboys ever since he's been the workhorse with Zach Moss out for the season with the neck injury. Chase Brown's doing it all. He's in between the tackles, a nice receiver out of the backfield. Let's face it, this Dallas Cowboy team can't stop anyone, so I think Chase Brown goes out there once again, has a big performance. Number 6, Josh Jacobs of the Green Bay Packers. So Josh Jacobs, it's been a solid first season for him with this Green Bay Packer team. And over the last few weeks, he's definitely got it going as Josh Jacobs. He's getting a big workload weekly. There's no competition, obviously, in the backfield. And this is why they gave him a nice contract in the offseason. So on Thursday night, usually high-scoring ball games, this matchup at the Lions, they know they got to put points on the board. And I think they'll lean pretty decently on Josh Jacobs in this one. Number 7, James Cook of the Buffalo Bills. Last week, a big ball game for James Cook in the snow versus San Francisco 49ers. And James Cook, we know he could do it all out of the backfield. And when you're part of a high-powered offense, more weeks than not, you're going to put up fantasy points. So this week on the fast track in Los Angeles, where their run defense really hasn't been good all season long, I think Cook goes out there once again and has a good ball game. Number 8, Breece Hall with the New York Jets. So Breece Hall, it's been a mixed bag of results. I know he was the 3rd, 4th overall pick in most fantasy drafts was Breece Hall, but this week's definitely a beatable matchup at the Miami Dolphins. We know this Jet team on paper, their offense is really good. Garrett Wilson, Devontae Adams, and obviously Breece Hall, but it hasn't translated on the field more weeks than not. But this week in Miami, like I said, I think it's going to be a high-scoring game between 2 AFC East rivals. And Breece Hall, we know he's a dual threat out of the backfield, receiving and in between the tackles. Number 9, Kyren Williams of Los Angeles Rams. So this week a tougher matchup with the Buffalo Bills coming to town. But last week Kyren went out there, possibly his best game of the season, over 100 yards on the ground, which was his best rushing performance, and he found the end zone at the New Orleans Saints. But this week could be tough sledding with their trailing early north, and they might have to abandon the run a little bit. But Kyren Williams, I still believe, one of the more talented running backs in football. And this week, even in a tougher matchup, he could go out there and put up some points. Number 10, Jahmyr Gibbs of the Detroit Lions. So Jahmyr Gibbs, it's been a great second season for Gibbs. We know he's the home run hitter. I know last week was a down game for him, and he fumbled at the 2-yard line where he was trying to extend the play and get into the end zone. But Gibbs, I think he'll learn from that. This week, another home game where obviously this line offense at home is lethal with the Green Bay Packers coming to town. And a Thursday night football game as well, where points will be put on the board early and often. Number 11, Kenneth Walker of the Seattle Seahawks. So Walker, definitely a down game last week, only 6.60 in PPR leagues. But Kenneth Walker, he's a home run hitting type of running back. He's a 3-down threat, obviously. I know Charbonnet vultured the touchdown last week from Kenneth Walker, but this week in a big division matchup at the Arizona Cardinals, a team they took care of a couple weeks ago, 16-6. I think they're going to establish the run in this one. Last week they were trailing early and often at the New York Jets, but came back and won. And this week, I think Walker definitely bounces back. Number 12, Bucky Irvin of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. I know Irvin's banged up, hurt the hip, but he re-entered the ball game in overtime, and they won it. Was his Tampa Bay Buck team, the Carolina Panthers, last week. So Irvin, he's been one of the best running backs over the last few weeks in fantasy football. In between the tackle, he can do it all, and it's one of the better 1-2 combos in the league. With obviously Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery, I think is the best running back combo in the league. But this week with a great matchup versus the Vegas Raiders, even not at 100%, I think Bucky Irvin could go out there once again and put up a big ball game this week for fantasy owners. 13, David Montgomery of the Detroit Lions. And David Montgomery, it's been a solid season for him. He's the bruiser and the goal line back for this Detroit Lion team is David Montgomery. And this week in a matchup versus a team he's obviously familiar with the Green Bay Packers, playing all those seasons with the Chicago Bears, and now a couple seasons here with the Detroit Lions. So this week, I think Montgomery, he could go out there. Definitely a possibility he finds the end zone. And like I said earlier, this is going to be a high-scoring ball game. 14, Tony Pollard of the Tennessee Titans. So a good first season for Tony Pollard this year with the Tennessee Titans. This week, a great matchup versus Jacksonville Jaguars. They can't stop anyone. And pretty much this offense runs through Tony Pollard, Calvin Ridley in the receiving game, and Nick Westbrook-Ikhine as a deep ball threat. So this week, I think points are going to be put on the board for Tennessee, one of the better outings of the season. And this week versus Jacksonville defense that can't stop anyone, Tony Pollard's in for a good ball game. 15, Isaac Guerendo of the San Francisco 49ers. Guerendo's the man in the backfield and the hottest pickup off the waiver wire. Even Jordan Mason went on IR with the ankle injury. So with McCaffrey out for the season and Mason out minimum 4 games, Guerendo's going to step into a big role as the rookie. And in flashes, we've seen him this season. Very explosive, one of the quicker combine speeds he at the running back position in many seasons. And this week, a great matchup versus Chicago Bears, a defense that really hasn't stopped anyone all season long. We saw the Lions have their way on the ground versus defense. And I think Guerendo, with his speed and the fresh legs, especially being a backup and third string majority of the season, could go out there this week and surprise a lot of people. But I'm big on Guerendo, the way he can run the football and just the breakaway speed. Like I said, we've seen it in a small sample size. 16, Aaron Jones of the Minnesota Vikings. Jones, the last month of the season, besides one big game a few weeks ago, his numbers have definitely dropped off. Here is Aaron Jones, and Cam Akers starting to play a little more snaps, but this week a decent matchup. Atlanta Falcons coming to town. Aaron Jones, I still believe, could go out there, put up numbers for fantasy owners. And last week he was just in the doghouse a little bit, fumbling the football. So this week I think he bounces back, and this Falcon defense really can't make stops on the ground. 17, Tyrone Tracy of the New York Giants, a solid rookie season besides the fumbles this year for Tyrone Tracy. So this week in a potential high-scoring ball game with the New Orleans Saints coming to town, I think Tyrone Tracy could go out there, put up his fantasy numbers. And Devin Singletary really hasn't been a threat to Tracy all season long, especially the last 6-7 weeks, where Tracy could do it all, catch the football out of the backfield, physical in between the tackles. And we already seen some big games out of Tracy this season. 18, Najee Harris of the Pittsburgh Steelers. And Najee Harris, it's been a solid season for him. Last week, a big ball game in the high-scoring affair at the Cincinnati Bengals. And this week, another division matchup versus the Browns coming to town, where last week up 41 points to the Broncos. I know 2 of those were pick sixes, but still 27 points to that Bronco offense they gave up. In retrospect, is this Cleveland Brown defense. And I think Najee Harris, he could go out there this week and have a similar game like he did last. 19, James Conner of the Arizona Cardinals. So the last 2 weeks, his numbers have definitely dropped off. Is James Conner. I know he signed a nice extension, 2 years, $19 million with this Arizona Cardinal team last week. And this week, not the greatest matchups versus Seattle, where they versed him a couple weeks ago in Seattle, and he only had 9.90 fantasy points in PPR leagues. And this offense, they're trying to find ways to get Marvin Harrison more involved. And I think they abandoned the run a little bit too much, is Arizona. So this week, James Conner, he's nothing more than a number 2 back. To me, number 20, Chuba Hubbard of the Carolina Panthers. A great season it's been for Chuba Hubbard. Another running back like Conner that had a contract extension a few weeks ago. But this week, a tough matchup at the Philadelphia Eagles. And we saw Jonathan Brooks, he was mixed in last week as well. But Hubbard's still going to get his touches, 15, 20 touches per game. But like I said, this ball game in Philadelphia could be tough sledding. But like I said, even in tough matchups this season, Hubbard's gone out there and proved a lot of fantasy owners wrong. and he's put up numbers. 21, Rachaad White of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So like I said earlier, him and Bucky Irvin, a nice 1-2 combo in the backfield, with White being a nice receiving back and one of the better receiving backs in all pro football. So this week in a great matchup versus the Vegas Raiders that can't stop anyone. I think White could go out there and show what he could do in the receiving game and help fantasy owners and this Buck team this week. 22, DeAndre Swift of the Chicago Bears. So I think this Bear team with a new coaching staff now, Eberflus got fired after the horrendous play clock debacle last week at Detroit. They're going to throw the football more is the Chicago Bear offense. I know Roscoe Johnson's in concussion protocol. It's not looking good for him to play this ball game. But this week, it's not the greatest of matchups for San Francisco. I know last week James Cook went off over 100 yards and found the end zone, and running backs have had success this season versus the 49ers. But DeAndre Swift, the last few weeks, his touches have gone down. And when they're trailing early and often, they have to pass, and Swift hasn't really done much in the passing game. So this week, he's definitely dropped down the rankings a little bit. 23, Isaiah Pacheco of the Kansas City Chiefs. I know Pacheco last week, he got eased back into it. He only had a handful of touches for this Kansas City Chiefs team. But as the weeks go on, he's going to get healthier. Now, in between games with 9 days off, Isaiah Pacheco, I think that's going to help him. They're going to see how his recovery time goes. But this week is a pretty good, decent matchup versus the Chargers, where their run defense has been middle of the pack over the last couple of weeks versus teams like Cincinnati. Last week versus Atlanta, Bijan Robinson had a good ball game. And this week, I think Pacheco, with more of a workload, can have a good ball game this week. 24, Rico Dotto of the Dallas Cowboys. So Rico Dotto, he should have been the full-time running back in the start with this Dallas Cowboy team. So Dotto last week, his best game of the season, over 100 yards on the ground, found the end zone. And this week, a lot of scoring is going to go on in this ball game, I believe, with the Cincinnati Bengals coming to town on Monday Night Football, and they can't stop anyone. So Rico Dotto, believe it or not, majority of the season, he's had double-digit fantasy games in PPR leagues. 25, Nick Chubb of the Cleveland Browns. And Nick Chubb, I know he's a touchdown-dependent running back, but the last 2 weeks, he's had 3 touchdowns, is Nick Chubb. And going back to 2 weeks ago versus Steelers defense in that snowball game, he had 2 touchdowns. So this week at Pittsburgh, I think he's a decent flex option. Big physical back, still trying to get his legs under him. I know we're not going to see much out of him in the passing game, but this week at the Steelers, it wouldn't be surprising to me if he finds the end zone in this game. 26, Jaylen Warren of the Pittsburgh Steelers. So Warren, he's been phased back into the offense over the last few weeks here, and he's finally healthy, and he's a good receiving back. I said coming into the year, I thought Warren would have more of a role, but obviously injuries held him back. But like I said, now he's a third down and passing downs back. He's fit well with Russell Wilson in their quarterback over the last month of the season. So this week, in a very beatable matchup versus a defense that just fell apart this season in the Cleveland Browns, I think Warren could go out there and be a decent flex option. 27, Travis Etienne of the Jacksonville Jaguars. So this Jaguar team, it's been a train wreck all season. Trevor Lawrence took the monster hit in last week's ball game. He's not going to play in this one, most likely. And this running game's been non-existent. But this week, it's an okay matchup at Tennessee. Tennessee, they've been giving up a lot of points all season long. But this offense is still going to have trouble moving the football with Mac Jones in there, quarterback, I believe. And obviously, Gabe Davis, Christian Kirk. So this week, I'm not expecting much by Etienne. Then he's a back-end option. 28, Kareem Hunt of the Kansas City Chiefs. Kareem Hunt, last week, he definitely took a backseat in the running game for this Kansas City Chiefs team, where he carried this team on the ground for 8 to 10 weeks when Pacheco was out with injury, and Carson Steele couldn't be the guy in the backfield for the Chiefs. So this week in a matchup versus the Chargers, like I said, the ceiling really isn't high with Isaiah Pacheco back in the lineup. And Kareem Hunt, he's nothing more than a backup running back at this point, and a change of pace with an occasional goal line touches. 29, Gus Edwards of the Los Angeles Chargers. So Gus Edwards, he's a one-trick pony type of running back, obviously. This is a tough matchup at the Kansas City Chiefs, where their run defense has been solid a majority of the season. And if he's not getting the goal line touchdown, is Gus Edwards. His numbers have been pretty much non-existent throughout his career. Last season, if he didn't have double-digit touchdowns, was Edwards with the Baltimore Ravens. His fantasy points would have been minimum. So right now, with Kamini Vidal being the number 2 back, third down passing downs back, Gus Edwards, if they're down early and often in this game at Kansas City, he's not really going to see the field, in my opinion. 30, Sincere McCormick of the Vegas Raiders. So last week, he got the start. He got 12 carries, 64 yards in that ball game, was McCormick at the Kansas City Chiefs. And this week, a good matchup at the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, where their defense hasn't stopped anyone all season long. I know Alexander Madison, Zamir White, possibility they return in this ball game, but McCormick's a running back that I think is going to get an opportunity. And let's face it, this Raider team's going nowhere this season. They're 2-10 on the season. And McCormick's a running back that's been decent in the last couple weeks here. And I think he gets an opportunity this week. 31, Jonathan Brooks of the Carolina Panthers. So Brooks, he got more touches last week in that ball game versus the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And he actually had 7.1 fantasy points. Is Jonathan Brooks. So the best running back coming out of college last season. Obviously, he was recovering from the torn ACL. And we know this Panther team's going nowhere this season with only 3 wins. And they want to see what these young guys are going to do. So I know Chuba Hubbard's there. I know he got the extension. But I think Jonathan Brooks, as the season winds down, it's going to get more touches and more looks. And this week, I think if you're desperate, he's a back-end option. 32, Tank Bigsby of the Jacksonville Jaguars. So this week, not a great matchup with Tennessee. Bigsby, the last couple weeks, his touches have gone down for this Jaguar team. And to be honest, it's been a train wreck all season long for most options in this Jaguar offense, besides Brian Thomas and Evan Ingram for fantasy owners. So this week, if you're desperate at running back with bye weeks and injuries, Tank Bigsby maybe can help you or maybe surprise, because in between the tackles, he's definitely a better running back than Travis Etienne. But the last few weeks, we really haven't seen much from him, and his ceiling isn't high. 33, Tyrell Algier of the Atlanta Falcons, one of the best handcuff running backs in all pro football. No doubt about it, is Tyler Algier. We know he gets a good workload as a backup compared to other backups in the league. But Bijan Robinson, it's been a great season for him. And Algier, if he's not getting the goal line touchdown, isn't really going to have fantasy value. So this week in Minnesota, I think he could get in there for 8 to 12 touches, but obviously not a high ceiling. 34, Jerome Ford of the Cleveland Browns. So Jerome Ford, last week he worked a decent amount of snaps. Nick Chubb, he was in and out of the game, and mostly out of the game in the second half, where they were trailing was Cleveland a majority of that half and had to throw themselves back into the game, where Jameis Winston threw for 497 yards. So this week in a ball game in Pittsburgh, where it could be a grinded out division matchup in the AFC North between these two teams, I think Jerome Ford, he'll get some work. But another guy, not really with a high ceiling, 35, Zach Charbonnet of the Seattle Seahawks. So last week he got some work to Zach Charbonnet. He vultured a goal line touchdown from Kenneth Walker in that ball game at the New York Jets. And this week it's an okay matchup at the Arizona Cardinals. So I think Charbonnet, they're going to work him in a little bit more here, is his Seattle Seahawks team. And he's a running back that was a second-round pick in last season's NFL draft. He definitely has good potential upside, but obviously he hasn't seen the field except early in the season where he was a starter. He put up good numbers. So this week at Arizona, maybe he could surprise and be a decent desperation play. And 36 and final back I'm ranking this week here is Ray Davis of the Buffalo Bills. So Ray Davis last week an early first quarter touchdown. Garbage time, he put up some points, and he's another running back that's one of the best handcuff backs in all pro football, in my opinion. So this week with a matchup with the Rams, where their defense really hasn't been that good, Ray Davis could go out there and once again surprise and get more touches like he did last week. So that's the top 36 running backs I'm ranking for Week 14 of the fantasy football season.